Barry is a show that I initially gave up on at first, as the first season was slow and the jokes were a bit too basic to keep me hooked. Though eventually I came back and finished the last few episodes of season 1, and I'm glad I did. Barry proved to be one of the best comedy drama series that I had ever seen, and definitely the most unique show of that genre. Whilst watching a show, I had never gone from hysterical laughter to a tense, hair-raising thrill like I did when watching Barry. Barry, the titular character of the show, is an apathetic hitman who's bored with his current day job. He seems to have no interests and finds zero enjoyment in his life. Until one day, whilst he's out on a job to kill a student who slept with a mob boss's wife, Barry follows this student into his acting class and somehow ends up caught up in a performance. One thing after another, Barry finds himself enjoying the acting class so much that it makes him want to quit being a hitman altogether and pursue acting. In season 1, Barry struggles to leave the hitman life behind. He owes a debt to the Chechens, and so he's forced to continue killing. As he continues to live these two separate lives, they end up getting twisted together, and as a consequence to that, people get caught up in the thick of it. Barry as a character is interesting because his character equally shows the least amount of emotion in the series, whilst also showing the most amount of emotion out of anyone in other scenes. He also has such a nonchalant attitude when he kills people, and the scenes themselves are shot to show that when they die, it's instant. The camera quickly pans away as if such a mundane thing has just happened. Though when Barry kills for reasons other than just doing a job or seeking revenge, the scene is shot differently. There's typically a quick cut, one that leaves you filling in the blanks of what had just happened. It's as if Barry is in denial and he wants to forget those specific deaths and move on, as if they're only one-offs and don't actually make him a bad person. But the reality is, Barry kills people, and whether they're closely connected to him or not, the pile of bodies grows, and he is definitely not a good person. As I mentioned before, this show is a dark comedy. My current description of it might have glossed over that fact, but Barry uses dark humour to keep the story fresh and interesting, whilst also purposely shifting between that and dramatic tension. Don't get me wrong, there are countless scenes that simply reiterate what we already know about these characters, which allow for some of the comedy to be just humorous. There's an episode in season 2 which, if you've seen Barry, you'll already know what I'm talking about, but there is an episode which from start to finish had me dying in laughter. But like I said before, there's a switch between comedy and serious tension that is almost uncanny. Within the next episode, the humour had disappeared and we were left with nothing but the horror that follows Barry's actions. It can be funny at first, but the consequences always creep up on us. It's probably on purpose. We as the viewer tend to forgive a terrible protagonist for the sake of the story, but in Barry, we laugh at the horrible things that happen, until they take the smiling characters away and fill them with fear. Let's talk about the other characters in the show, as it's a lot more than just Barry walking around killing people. There are other characters that are just as hilarious in their own right, and are all essential to the story. There's Sally, Jean, Hank, and Fuse, just to name a few. Sally is a girl who's incredibly insecure, and she's struggling to embrace her truth. I would say that she feels as if she has to wear a mask, but it's more so that she is in denial of her own backstory, and also has to deal with the struggle of being a female actress in LA. Her insecurities give her the worst of both worlds, as she pushes herself so hard to try and gain roles or to progress in her career, which makes it seem pretentious, though it just stems from her need to make progress. Otherwise, she'll start to loathe herself and put herself down. The humour of her character really drives home all of her flaws. For example, there's a scene later on in the first season where she talks about a past relationship. She tells Barry that she never tells anyone about it, then goes on to mention every other student in the class and says that they all know about it too. This reiterates how Sally craves pity and positive reinforcement and constantly wants to be the centre of attention. There's also the teacher of the whole class, Jean Cousineau, who probably plays one of the most important characters in the entire series. Jean's the typical arrogant actor who oversells himself and his capabilities. He does seem to care a lot for his students, but can't help but undermine his intentions by bringing up private tutoring fees whenever he has a one-on-one conversation with a student after class. He pretty much doesn't know how to be respectful or treat people correctly. He's definitely one of the funnier characters in the show, and in the first season, I'd say he was the best in terms of humour. We've also got Fuse, who's kind of like Barry's boss. He essentially finds all the hitman work that Barry does, and that's about all he does. Seriously though, Fuse is an extremely important character in the series. Him and Barry argue with each other all the time, and of course, Barry doesn't even seem to like him very much. It's kind of hard to speak about Fuse without spoiling anything, but I will say this. He's someone who seems like he's got no skill in the game, and desperately needs Barry to do all the hit jobs to earn their money. But Fuse has some tricks up his sleeve. All of the characters I've named aren't just thrown into the show. They've all got this similar dynamic with Barry. Basically, Barry has a personality disorder, and that's why he's so apathetic towards everything, except for the people he cares for. But his caring can get weird. With each of these characters, he craves some kind of acknowledgement from them. With Sally, he wants her to care about him so he can feel like a normal person, even if he isn't one. Fuse and Jean both resemble a sort of parental role for Barry, and it makes sense considering that they represent each of Barry's two different lifestyles. Fuse is the side of him that is the hitman business, while Jean is on the acting side of things. There is one more character I've got to mention, as he's the embodiment of pure humour in this show. NoHo Hank, the absolute legend. He's a part of the Chechens family and his humour is next level. He is sort of the token dumb character of the show, so sometimes his bits might be a bit generic, though I feel like he grows far beyond that over the course of the show. His character as a whole is just completely against the grain in terms of the crime drama genre. And that can be said with pretty much every character in the show as well, as a lot of the humour is used to undercut the violence. It's almost a parody of what typically happens in shows like The Sopranos or Breaking Bad. For example, you've got this mob boss guy who looks like a Tony Soprano clone. The mob boss is supposed to be dangerous, though when we see his headquarters, it's just his garage, which is noticeably filled with children's toys. As for Hank, there's a scene where he's held up at gunpoint and he accepts his fate like a badass. Then when the gun is lowered, he vomits and the tension is washed away with it. I want to say that they purposely undercut these scenes not only as a way to go against the stereotype of strong male protagonists, but to keep the real tension of the show that happens later on in each season much more impactful. That's all I got for today. See ya.